Okay, so I think this is going to probably appeal to the majority here. And when we talk about a basic online setup, we're talking about some kind of mobile device or basic computer, and then some kind of a cam or mic that's in the mobile device or it's part of the computer. Okay, so those are our computer devices that I'm incorporating here into basic setups. Okay, so it could be a computer, PC, smartphone, or a tablet. But the key here is you're not like adding a webcam. You're using the cam that's within the device. And then you're using an app to video conference. And for our purposes now, we're going to talk about Zoom in a little bit. And then you're using Wi-Fi or cell-based internet. Okay, I think the majority of you are going to be using that type of setup. So I just want to talk about the, what you can do with this, and then like what the limitations are. I can list equipment all day, but equipment is really based off what you're using. So I'm not going to list equipment here, but if you have specific setups, I mean, like go ahead and list it in the comments, and tell me what you're using, what device you're using. Is it a PC? Is it a Mac? The more specific, the better. And if you just plan on just using that and Zoom, and if you're using another app, that's fine, like Skype. And then, are you using Wi-Fi or, cell-based, like 4G or 5G? So based off of that, then, I can tell you what kind of equipment to get in terms of a stand for your phone or your tablet, and that's really all you need. So it's pretty simple. But, some people may be thinking about doing add-on stuff. So you got to have a baseline. So once you have your baseline, then you can, if you have expectations to want to do more with it, then at least if you have that baseline, then I can know how to help you. Okay? So I am not going to list equipment because it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. The only piece of equipment that I could advise in almost every situation as an add-on would be the Logitech webcam, the C920 model, C930 model. Those are fantastic, work across the board. Other than that, there's preference involved, there's price involved, and then there's what it's optimized for. The benefits of having a basic online setup is you don't have to worry about cables and this, you don't have to worry about anything complex there. You can just put your phone or your tablet or your computer on the stand, open up or go to the app, log in, put the number in, or send the link to the student, and then log in is very, very easy, especially with Zoom. And then just do a quick test, right, of either lighting or positioning. It doesn't take long to do that. And then make sure that you have the shot that you want. Make sure the device is far enough, but not too far. It depends on your screen size too. So that is obviously the benefit. You don't have to worry about anything other than that. It's very, very simple. You can also access all the features of Zoom, although I would say it's a lot better on a bigger screen, but you do have access to that on any of your mobile devices. Now, the limitations are that just in a workflow setting, it's a lot easier to do things on a computer in terms of operating Zoom. And then you can use, if you do have an additional tablet or iPad or iPhone, you can use that as an additional device to do other things with. And that opens up a lot of things that I'm going to talk about with more enhanced online setup. Okay, so just in general, your limitations are workflow related, and just be able to to do more of the kind of cooler, neat stuff. But obviously the benefit is it's really quick and easy to set up. Okay. So now we move to the enhanced online setup, which is allowing you to do more cool, fun things and multiple webcams. Incorporate the iPad into your setup or a tablet to be able to do more, facilitate annotations, on-screen sharing. That's a lot more efficient and workable than using the on-screen in Zoom. Okay, the Zoom features are great because it's packed with features, but most of those features I don't use in Zoom. I use my iPad for that. So if you do have an extra iPad, I'll talk about that a little bit later. You just plug it in, and then instantly you have a whole nother world opens up in terms of what you can do with your lessons. Okay, so in the enhanced online setup, I would say that the computer, to be able to operate up to 2 webcams, because you want to be able to have the opportunity to have a profile shot, and you want to have the over the top or bird's eye view webcam. Okay, so in order for that to happen, you need at least 4 to 8 gigabyte of RAM with a processor that's, I would say, kind of in the last 5 years. Computer manufactured the last 5 years. You could probably go back a little bit. It just depends on how fast the processor is. And I'll give specs later on that. And then, using external USB mics, plug in to be able to give you a little bit better sound than you would from a computer mic or your mobile device mic. And then headphones. Headphones are so awesome because it's kind of like surround sound. It really gets you focused and just a different mindset for lessons. It's almost a have to be honest, but if you're thinking about getting a better experience out of it. I already talked about additional tablet or iPad, and then even a second monitor. Most computers have either have an HDMI port, or you can get an adapter for that. So getting a second monitor to be able to conserve screen space, that is super important, because if you do that, now it opens up, you can do more stuff as well. So you have your computer either for your note taking, and then you have your external monitor just for viewing the student and the lesson. Okay, so I think the benefits are pretty understandable there. Now we can do multiple shots with your camera. Your sound's going to be better just in general. It's not going to be great in terms of like if you were doing a recording, but it will give you better sound in general. Once again, all that is determined by having a strong internet connection both ways. And then, it opens up the ability to do virtual software, to do, like the MIDI virtual keyboard, do those kind of things, do theory in your lesson, more interactive things. Okay, and now we get to the optimal online setup, and my setup would fall within this range. Your computer would need to be, will have a lot of RAM, and a lot of RAM is basically 8 being minimum, but 16 being preferable. A very fast processor, and just in general terms, you're going to want to get on the higher end of the spectrum of whatever computer you get. And then this allows you to be able to get use up to 4 external cameras. And now there are some things there to possibly work out. You may need to, you're going to definitely need to add in some USB hubs and other types of interfaces to spread out the CPU and the CPU bandwidth. So you get more deep into this, you're going to need more specific items hardware to conserve your computer processing speed. And then an audio interface. It's basically like a box that's used as your sound source, and then that plugs in, for the most part, USB. You may have seen a mixer before, sound mixer. It's kind of like that, but it's smaller, less channels, and it's designed for broadcasting. And so this is essentially what you're doing. You're getting a kind of a broadcast type setup if you get the software to go along with it, and you can do the things that I'm able to do. The headset, that's a crucial part, because you don't want to have your mic and your headphones separate in this type of setup. You want to be able to move and do things and not have to worry about mic placement, sound. Everything is going into one source. So the headset has to be part of that equation for it to be optimal. And even a third monitor. I know it sounds overkill, but you need screen space. And why is that? Because you need to be able to capture what's on the screen to be able to do the more interactive things, the MIDI keyboard or the theory programs. You got to be able to capture that. You need screen space for that. And there's only so much screen space that you can layer things and perfectly match them on there, especially if you have a program you're taking notes. So I'll demonstrate what that looks like on my computer at the very end of this segment. And you need hardwired, redundant, fast internet. Now, you can also have really good Wi-Fi, like really dependable Wi-Fi. But redundancy is really key, just in terms of being optimal with your lessons. So I think in any situation, redundancy is super important, but especially here at this stage, you might as well go ahead and make it redundant. And basically, it means you have a backup plan. And that backup plan, in most cases, is going to be having a hotspot. And so if your router goes down, or if for whatever reason you have internet failure, you can back up and you can be back online, within a minute or two. Okay, so let's move on to Zoom, which is going to be the video conference app I speak about. Now, that's not to discredit any of the other apps. I always advise teachers to try all the apps out, because depending on the environment, when I say environment, I'm talking about, one device going to another device, or depending on your internet speed, depending on your computer. I mean, there's all sorts of things that could, in certain situations, make one better than the other. But in general, just through my testing and what you've seen online, is that Zoom is the best application overall for, especially for piano lessons. I think just in general for musical instruments. I believe the codec is just better suited for it. So Zoom definitely has the upper hand there. Okay, so with that said, Zoom is free. And it is free as long as you're doing one-on-one. And the length of lesson does not matter. So if you are doing group, or you want to have multiple people in there, you can actually have up to 100 people in the room if it's within the 40-minute range. So if you wanted to do a group class, and it's a short group class, you could use the same Zoom room to do that. Anything over 40 minutes, you're going to have to go to that first paid tier, which off the top of my head, I think it's $15 a month. So with that said, you can also do breakout rooms for group lessons. So for those that are interested in putting certain people in separate rooms, so that way you can hear them as they practice, you can communicate with them. outside of the class environment. So that's a great feature. I did use it once last year and for summer camps. Okay, and then also you can do screen sharing and annotations. Now, if you are using a computer, I would highly advise plugging in your iPad or tablet and using that for that, and I'll show that in a minute. Lesson recordings are a big thing, obviously, mentioned earlier. It's very easy to do. You just click on record, and then once you're done with the session, in session, and then you can set it to save in a folder, and I would highly advise you to save that on an external hard drive. So definitely invest in an external hard drive if you're going to save the recordings. Or you can have it saved to Dropbox. Just make sure that Dropbox is not linked with your desktop. So that's really key there. I thought about like doing a Zoom tutorial, and I actually started doing it, but there's so much to dive into, and I have still more things to get to. So I will do a Zoom tutorial, but not at this point. Now, if you have specific questions, I can answer those, or the best that I can. But just for the purposes of this video, I'm going to go ahead and move along. Okay, so now we get into the little bit more advanced features of your online lesson setup. And obviously, you have to have a computer to be able to do this, and it's best to have a second monitor to be able to do most of the things I'm going to be getting into, and also a tablet or an iPad, preferably. So I'm just going to kind of rattle off some programs I use. iReal Pro, backing track program, GarageBand, recording and composing program, and then virtual keyboard programs, Ridiculous, like MIDI, but ridiculous, Classroom Maestro, and let's see here, just kind of look in here, Cordy, which is a great tool to use. That actually you can split it off into just the staff, and then also chord names. So there's all these really neat software that you can use to communicate visually the things that you're playing, and also be more interactive in your lessons. Not all students need this, but if you have the opportunity to do this and incorporate it into your lessons, it's really just becomes part of the workflow, and it doesn't really add time at all once you get it set up. And yeah, you have to learn the software, you have to learn the new interface a little bit in terms of how it works, but these are not complicated programs. It's basically plug and play. All right, the most important thing to be able to use interactive tools, you have to have screen space, because the way that this works is once you have your screen space and your programs laid out, then you can actually capture the screen, capturing basically whatever's on the screen. It's sent out virtually to another software. So whatever I play here, that information visually is captured and it is sent, and then that's done in real time. There's no latency there. So as you're talking or you're doing your lessons, you can do all of the visual demonstration that you just saw. It's all about screen space. You have to have a second monitor at the very, very least to do this. And then at that point, then if you're using a broadcasting software, which we'll get to, then you can piece that all together and you can create scenes. And then you can basically be an artist with it. Be creative artist in how you're presenting your information visually. So I just want to briefly talk about broadcasting software. Broadcasting software allows you to manipulate camera angles, zoom in, even tweak the lighting, use green screen, combine all that to give you really like a personalized touch on how you want to present your scenes. We call those scenes. And then you can transition between scenes, kind of like what you've seen here a little bit, what I'm doing in the stream here. But the really important thing here to understand, if you're going to be using broadcast software, you're going to have to need a little bit more high-powered computer than the average computer, because that means you're going to be running multiple webcams, and you're going to be doing you're going to be doing a lot more things that require more processing. The other popular broadcast programs are OBS, Open Broadcasting System, and that's basically an open source program that's free. But you got to do a lot of work to get it to look like you want it to look like, and can be some conflicts with that too, depending on how you have everything routed. You can also use Minicam. That's a very popular option, and that's usually the one that I recommend to most teachers that I work with that want to do this kind of stuff. And then there's the ultimate, which is Wirecast, which is the ultimate software for doing any kind of production work, live production work. That's what I use. That's a huge investment, but if you're doing this full time, and if you think about you want to do it full time for a long time, it's an important decision, because you're going to have flaws that happen with these other programs that are not as high powered and not engineered at the level that Wirecast is. But for the most part, Minicam will do the job just fine, okay? That's the one I recommend the most. Okay, so let's get into Tony's question, which was about the necessary specs for multiple cameras and scenes, and creating tutorials, leaving multiple apps running. So to do that, I kind of covered this a little bit earlier. You need at least 8 megabits of RAM. I would recommend 16 megabits of RAM if you're doing a lot of heavy video stuff. Okay, that's like if you can, it's probably going to be a couple $100 more to go that direction, especially if you're using a Mac. But it's more than worth it. It's going to open up things and make it freer, and your computer is not going to slow down and get hot, after a few minutes of using your program. So 16 megabytes is really what you want to do. I notice a huge difference going from 8 to 16. Now you can get away with it with 8, but what happens is after like 2 cameras and you get to 3 into 4 cameras, if you do any of that, then it starts draining the resources, and then things will start acting up. So 16 if possible. That's really the key number, is 16 megabits of RAM. And then in terms of the processing speed, anything 2 and above in terms of gigahertz will be just fine. You definitely, if you have an Intel processor, you got to have at least the very minimum i5. But the newer ones have I think the i7 Intels. They may be higher than that at this point. But the key number is megabits of RAM, and then the hard drive space is super important. Make sure, look, you can defer some of the cost by not getting as much hard drive space. So I would get more RAM, less hard drive space, and then you basically just use your hard drive space just for your apps, and store nothing else on there except for your apps and programs. Everything goes on to hard drives. So you want to conserve space that way. And that in general goes for anybody doing video work. Make sure that you don't got a bunch of stuff cluttered on your desktop. Use external hard drives to move all of those files over there, and you will notice a significant difference in how your computer runs. So that in general will give you the ability to, 16 megabits. I operate up to 4 cams. I could probably add another one. I also have a Thunderbolt dock, and basically it's a high-powered version of the USB dock, and you can daisy chain those. So now Anytime I add a USB device, it's not drawing any USB bandwidth from the computer. So you want to take everything away from the computer if possible. You want to wire everything to where you have different other components that are doing the processing, not the computer. And that's the same for the webcams too. Look, the basic Logitech webcams are good for the price, but if you can bump it up to the next one, 930, they have their own processor. And so that limits the computer usage right there. So that's really the key. And if you do all of that, maybe you can do the 8 megabits of RAM, and be able to get away with that. I had a little glitch when I was recording, and I forgot to record part 3, which was talking about other instruments. So I'm going to group that into this little session here. It's been a really long week, so I'm kind of really drained, so I'm doing my best to plunge through all of this stuff here. Let's talk a little bit about vocal, brass, and woodwind. I mean, I just had a few questions from a vocal teacher and also a French horn teacher. The French horn teacher was asking me about being able to see the proper technique and the sound quality. Well, on the first one, really need to know like what you're working with. So is the student working with just a phone, a tablet, a computer, webcam? But with that said, if they're able to use an external device and they can move it around and reposition during the lesson to give you a little bit better, lighting is going to be important. So maybe make sure they're in the well-lit area to be able to see your hand on the bell, their hand on the bell correctly. And the same thing goes for you too. You need to be able to have good lighting and work on the actual camera angle. So it works both ways. You need to be able to see them. They need to be able to see you. So you need to make sure your setup is to the point where you can deliver that to them first, and then we can work with getting their setup a little bit better. Really, it's all about portability, making sure that they can move that camera around as needed. And I think that will help. In terms of sound quality, the best way to go is to get an audio interface. Use a computer audio interface. You can use actual real XLO mics, meant for instruments, condenser mics. But if you can't, then you're really at the mercy of whatever mic is being used, and there's nothing you can really do for that. So what you have to do is use more creative solutions on the back end in terms of help them with the technique in the lesson, but help more sound outside the lesson if that makes sense. So you can, you maybe even want to consider doing more video lessons so that way you can just spend the lesson time doing that, going back and forth. I know you lose that instant live connection there, but if you're really worried about that, you may want to consider doing video lessons versus live lessons. But it all depends on your setup, their setup, and the improvements that need to be made. Another thing that was prosed here is like not being in control of the play pause. So like if the student's doing the backing track, it's kind of out of your control. Well, I do this all the time with my jazz students, and if they have a separate mobile device, they need to have that designated as their kind of their play device, that they're, whether if it's iReal Pro or just playing a track in Dropbox. So, you can just be, if they're playing along with the track or singing along with the track, if you need them to stop, then they'll just be used to that after a while. And when you're speaking, they're going to hear it over the music. It will cut through. So I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're talking about in terms of being in control of play and pause. And it's not within your reach there, but that's really going to be the only solution in terms of being able to do this remotely. It's going to sound a lot better in terms of not having the latency be an issue. So would you rather that be an issue or latency, right? And then you can just work on managing through that and finding more efficient ways to communicate. And then one more thing, warm-ups for vocals, had that question. So really kind of falls into the same category of, well, coming up with a creative solution there, recording tracks. I think every teacher should learn how to do that anyways, regardless of online lessons, but just being able to make tracks personalized for students. And so you can do your warm-ups and record them. They can do either that along with them on the back side, on their side, or you can do call response. La da 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 da, da 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 da. And you can actually get into a rhythm if you're doing like chromatic warm-ups or solfege warm-ups. If you're doing the kind of the call response type of thing, you're not going to have latency be an issue, and you can get into a groove with it. So hopefully that answers your question there. If not, go ahead and drop a comment in the post. Okay. So what I'm going to finally do here is I'm going to get to just some basic tips here, kind of incorporating troubleshooting. Listen, just make sure you're very specific and very prudent, and just inquire about these things. Everything is really specific to what your setup is. And so I know that makes it a little bit more challenging, but you don't want to waste money, or you don't have to return stuff. You want to try to get it right the first time. The simpler the setup, the less you have to worry about. But there is not a one-size-fits-all solution, like I've said before. Outside of the Logitech webcam, in terms of anything outside of the device. Now, I know that one of you that is watching said you had an issue with Windows 10, that's kind of crazy with the Logitech webcam. So I'm going to look into that separately. I'm not sure what that issue is. So make sure that you're testing this with colleagues and students who are tech savvy. I may have mentioned that earlier. Record your online lessons when you practice. View the results. See if there's any improvements that you can make. We want to get it to at least like a satisfactory level, so that way, the experience is, not a poor one. At the same time, we also understand that we just need to be able to continue at any rate. But in order to make any kind of improvements, you have to do testing and you have to do observations. If you have any major issues that last longer than a few minutes, you got to just stop immediately. This is a big one. You'll waste, especially it's like a 30-minute lesson. You could easily waste an entire lesson with issues. So if it's not internet related, which if it's internet related, it will pop on the screen. I'll talk about that in a second. And then you need to go ahead and exit. And I would go ahead and reboot, because sometimes exiting the app, coming back in, is not foolproof on both sides. So it's just better just to tell your student, hey, let's just reboot, let's do this again, get back in there, and let's continue. So in terms of the internet connection, it is not always the bandwidth or the speed of the internet. Make sure your computer isn't just bogged down, okay? A lot of cases, that's all that's happening. So there's a activity monitor app, and that's for Mac. But I'm going to come back around after I make this video, and I will be more specific with a lot of the programs. But if you have anything that you can see the computer processor on your computer, it's activity monitor on the Mac, then you need to observe that. Make sure you're not peaking. Your computer performance in terms of percentage, what it's using, should be lower than 50%. You get higher than 50%, then all of a sudden it's running harder, and that's what you don't want, and that affects everything. So computer performance needing to be optimal is important for everything else to be in order. Okay, and there was also a mention of sometimes the video doesn't seem clear on the device, especially if you're using a phone or a tablet or an older device. It may seem like the camera image of you is not clear or either blurry or fuzzy or something like that. But on the recording, on the Zoom recording, whatever the result of that is the actual stream that the student's seen. Obviously, you need to be able to see them, but we want to make sure the student experience is first priority. So just make sure to observe the recordings. Once again, that's the most important thing in this whole process. And then you'll see what the actual true result is. Okay, so a last thing is to keep it simple. There is so many variations of everything. There's so many layers here, but keep it simple. If you have higher expectations, you need to temper them initially. Be realistic in the moment. Be patient. I'm here. Others are there to help out. I do one-on-one services as well to really dig into any troubleshooting problems or any if you want to really build on your setup to get a better experience. So don't just buy a bunch of stuff that people are saying to buy. Please, very likely one of those pieces of equipment is not going to be the best equipment for your setup. Okay? Make sure you consult with me or one of the other trained online instructors. A lot of us are really working to help get information out. It's been a really long week on a lot of different levels. And so I think by the end of next week, there should be a lot more clear information, more documents, more things to help. Plus the fact that between now and then, it's very important for you to go ahead and start communicating, start planning ahead. You don't have to do it all at once, okay? Just take it in small stages. So have a great day, and I will see you guys soon.